Today's topic is an economist's talking to an economist about how to compare prices and income across countries and how to compare prices and income today and in the past. It's a fascinating topic. Hello, everyone. Good to be with you once again. We are very, very lucky to have a very senior and distinguished economist with us today. He's Jean Baneth. I hope I pronounced his name somewhat accurately. He used to work for the World Bank and retired from there more than 30 years ago. So he knows the world. And he says that since then he's been doing nothing, which takes longer than it used to. Anyhow, let's hear from him. Over to you, Jean.
Thank you. Well, as Subhash said, my name is Jean Baneth. I'm of pre-World War II vintage. If I were a bottle of Bordeaux wine, I would be worth a fortune. After the World Bank, I worked for a while as a volunteer advisor to the government in Vietnam, also as a fellow of the Rajiv Gandhi Institute in Delhi. Since my return from Hanoi in 2004, I have mostly done nothing, but this takes me more and more time. So now I will tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I will tell you, then I will tell you what I had told you.
Okay.
So as somebody says, I will tell you that comparison of present prices and incomes to those in different times or different countries imparts less knowledge than is often believed. This holds whatever type of index we use and whether we convert country data into a common currency at market exchange rates or we use purchasing power parities. Now I will try to prove my case.
Okay.
William Dalrymple is an excellent historical writer whose latest book, The Anarchy, deals with the breakup of the Mughal Empire in the 18th century. Whenever it refers to a price or a sum of money, it gives its modern equivalent. For instance, on page 84, quote, "In the early days of his rule, when he wished to arm and equip a force to take on his cousin in Purnia, Siraj ordered the bankers to provide 10 million rupees. The amount is footnoted, 390 million pounds today." Well, 10 million pounds in 18th century India don't mean much to most people, so one first welcomes a modern equivalent. But then one wonders, if 10 million rupees are really worth 390 million today, they should have allowed Siraj to buy 40,000 automatic rifles or 200 French AMX tanks. And they should allow a modern warlord to hire a number of well-trained war elephants and mounted lancers. Now, these things are obviously absurd. In fact, 390 million today tells us nothing about what Siraj would have bought with his 10 million rupees. It just imparts an illusion of knowledge. Another illustration of a similar difficulty is given by a recent BBC podcast, How Rich Was Jane Austen's Mr. Darcy? Mr. Darcy's annual income of £10,000 made him one of the richest people in England in 1810. So, asked the BBC, how rich would the present equivalent of these £10,000 make him today? Well, what is that present equivalent? Adjusting £10,000 for inflation since 1810 gives Darcy a present annual income of, say, £800,000 or about $1 million. That's fairly comfortable, but well below the income of a modern tycoon. Then what if the modern Mr. Darcy's income was worth the wages of as many unskilled workers as £10,000 were worth in 1810? That corresponds to an annual income of over £10 million. Yet another way the BBC looks at this is to give the modern Darcy the same share of Britain's national income as represented by £10,000 in 1810. That would be £61 million, about $75 million. Very nice, though Benzema is paid more for playing football in Saudi Arabia. The BBC does not say how they estimated the underlying figures. It is easy enough to find out prevailing basic wages, and enough data can also be collected, to calculate annual inflation rates. while there is some ambiguity in those because the composition of the product baskets changes, such changes are slow enough that they can be neglected from one year to the next, but they add up over time. Too many new goods and services appear even over 20 years, so that we cannot really say how much a present style of living would have cost 20 years ago, let alone 220. Chain linking annual inflation rates indicates with reasonable accuracy average and total inflation over a period, but gives us no clue as to how much a bunch of goods and services sold long ago would cost today, and obviously even less clue how much a bunch of goods and services sold today would have cost long ago. The values and growth rates of national incomes were calculated or researched by the late Angus Maddison for countries distant in space and time. His estimates are best available, but given the poverty of data over those periods, they cannot be very accurate. Yet even if these values and growth rate estimates were perfect, they would not show how today's national income is a given multiple of the past, not that a past national income is a given fraction of the present. Darcy's income and Siraj's military strength or desired strength are simply of historical interest. Present inter-country relationships of incomes and prices are relevant to policy decisions. We can compare national values by converting them into a single currency at market exchange rates. This is not fully satisfactory for several reasons, but the most obvious of which is that exchange rates fluctuate. Thus, on 20 November 2000, the euro fell to 84 US cents. 5 years later, it had risen to $1.56. It fell back again to 97 US cents on 3 October 2022, and nowadays it hovers around $1.10. Yet during those 22 years, the inflation rates in the US and euro area were very similar. So price relationships varied about as much as the exchange rate relation. Eligibility for various concessional financing often depends on per capita incomes as published annually in the World Bank Atlas. Yes. So how to calculate them has operational significance. In 1982, the World Bank's board asked us to discuss and justify those calculation methods. I then presented a paper previously endorsed by distinguished outside experts, which advocated the use of national data converted into dollars at the 3-year average of the real exchange rate, though recognizing the shortcomings of this method. The World Bank's board unanimously approved this method, which is still in use. But it is not unanimously accepted. A few years ago, in a short article, I again argued for this method, and this provoked a protest by Larry Summers, who affirmed that the only valid way to compare national values was using purchasing power parity. So what is purchasing power parity? I shall refer to it as PPP. For the past 55 years, the International Comparison Program sought to measure national incomes and related magnitudes by imputing a common price to all products in different countries, thus converting them into units of equal purchasing power. Covering a few countries only at its onset, it now covers most countries. In principle, measuring all components of national incomes is the same yardstick. So how good is this yardstick? The ICP calculates prices every 5 years. From the program's onset, many newly calculated intercountry relationships of PPPs differed from those extrapolated from the previous round's data. Right. China's to America jumped by almost half once. Such changes are caused by changes in the ways methodological problems are treated. These problems fall into two broad categories. One is what common price to choose. The other, how to identify identical items in every country and how to adjust for differences when comparing items that are not quite identical. In the early days of the ICP, all purchasing power parities were computed at American prices. Had, say, Indian prices been used, the resulting values and relationships of national incomes would have been very different. The choice of a common price is the first determinant of the results of PPP computations. International prices are nowadays computed as the weighted average of prices in all participating countries. This adaptation of what's called Fisher's ideal index avoids extreme results. But this choice and its name should not obfuscate the fact that PPP values are largely determined by the choice of one yardstick among several possible. At these international prices, the relationship between, say, Bangladesh and Pakistan is very different from that computed at Pakistani or Bangladeshi prices, or some combination of the two. Also, a change in any price in any one participating country changes computer values in all countries. Use of international prices may be the least imperfect solution, yet there is surely something intellectually perturbing by the fact that you what happens in the US. Put on 5 pounds of weight because which is really what happens. So far, I mentioned only the choice to be made between various national prices for a combination of the two. But what are those national prices? How can one judge them? They're the same product, state markets, and the advantage compensates difficult to do differences. Seemingly identical products may respond to different equivalent of $1 to about $1.40. In America, the baguette is a gourmet food sold in high-end bakeries. Friends bought one for $3.50 this week in DC and for $6 last in California. Are these gourmet foods really the same product as the ordinary French baguette? And that's much more expensive? Or should they be compared to some other French products, say the croissant? When something is found only in one country, what are to be the counterparts? Sago is the staple food in much of the Moluccas and New Guinea, but serves as a human food absolutely nowhere else. What should be chosen as its counterpart in Thailand? What is the US equivalent of a curry served on banana leaves in a roadside restaurant in India? Are haircuts in a barber shop in Hollywood the true equivalent, the same product as haircuts on the pavement in Hanover? How should one read the quality differences between the two? One might ask the same questions about appendectomies performed in public hospitals in France or Sri Lanka and in the Mayo Clinic in the US. What about values of services rendered by civil servants in countries where they may not be equally efficient or perhaps equally honest as in others? Should American high school teachers' work be valued higher than that of Vietnamese teachers to reflect their longer training? Or that of the Vietnamese valued higher because they teach more people in their classes and get better results? Or should they be given the same international prize? The 3 most important factors set to be determine real estate prices are location, location, and location. The location advantages of a Manhattan apartment over a Kalamazoo apartment are indicated by their prices. But how is one to establish appropriate common price or adjustment to apply to housing in Boston, Bamako, and Berlin? Many arbitrary decisions are involved in determining which apparently dissimilar items should be items should be attributed to quality or other differences. Arbitrary is by no means a criticism. It is the unavoidable need to arbitrate between different reasonable options which lead to different results. We do not compare prices and income just to have some important numbers. We are interested in comparisons of welfare or of potential for producing capital goods or military power. Thus, the power parities help. Prices are cheaper and 5 more abundantly consumed in A than in country B. Industrial goods are similarly priced in both countries or abundantly consumed in B. Assume also that A's per capita income is only 3% of B's. At exchange rate, national prices 10% at purchasing power. What happened now?
We had some kind of an internet problem, but please continue. I can't see your face. I can't hear you and I can't see you.
Okay, can I continue? Okay.
But we can't see you.
And connection.
Some.
Can see.
Yes, now.
You
yes, please. Yeah. Okay, I'll fix it in the editing. Okay. Yeah, please go ahead.
Can you hear?
Yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The marginal satisfaction derived from a product increases as the quantity consumed increases. The 5 times higher volumes of domestic services they consume give A's families 5 times the satisfaction such services give to B's families. If they had to pay wages and could buy industrial goods at international prices, A's families would consume fewer domestic services and more industrial goods. PPP conversions of consumption levels do not give a more accurate picture of relative welfares than conversions with exchange rate. A similar warning applies to potential for investment or military power. In a perfectly functioning economy, resources produce identical marginal values in all sectors in which they are used. This ideal is never attained, but is approximated. Thus, when resources employed in one sector are transferred to another, the value of their marginal product in the new sector tends to be the same as the original sector at market prices. The potential for raising investment or military power by shifting resources to such sectors is more correctly measured at market prices than at international prices and PPPs. I will now try to summarize and conclude. We can calculate approximately accurate average inflation rates and total inflation even over a long period by chain linking annual inflation rates, which will not differ much whatever type of index we use. However, that does not define the present equivalent of a sum paid long ago, and even less the long ago equivalent of price paid today. One can convert national incomes and other values into a common currency prevailing exchange rate. This is an imperfect method because of differences in the prices of identical products and because fluctuations in real exchange rates cause relative prices to vary, even in the absence of domestic changes. This problem cannot be eliminated, though it is by the determinant of the resulting values and relationships of national income. Nowadays, an international comparison program uses a weighted average of prices in participating countries. This adaptation of Fisher's ideal index avoids extreme results, but values and the relationship between countries depend on prices and outputs in every other participating country. Thus, any change in prices or outputs in the US modifies the values and ratios of purchasing power in India and China, even if nothing has changed. taking into account quality, consumer habits, location, etc. Few products are identical, even two countries, let alone all. So statisticians must arbitrate between reasonable but imperfect solutions, which lead to different outcomes. Furthermore, PPP ratios and national incomes may be farther than exchange-converted relationships from reflecting relative welfares, relative production potentials, relative military power. Using either method imparts some knowledge. Neither, not even both, impart full knowledge. Simpler and admittedly partial but better defined indicators may sometimes be more informative than all-encompassing but ill-defined indicators. The going wage of a mounted lancer or the price of a war elephant in 1750 would tell us more about intentions than the assertions that 10 million rupees in 1750 are 390 million pounds today. The basic hourly wage rate and the cost of a 1,000-calorie meal of sago or the price of a Big Mac can sometimes bring us closer to understanding Moroccan, Vietnamese, or American standards of living than purchasing power parities that depend on Voltaire, who in 1764 wrote in his Dictionnaire philosophique at the entry labeled idea. It is very sad not to know. I admit it. I have had my say.
Well, thank you so much. You know, you have really raised a very important question. For example, people are today, let's just look at today, people are saying which is...
I have a tendency.
No, you've done well. Let me say, look, people are saying which economy is bigger, China or the US? It's a very tough question to answer, right?
Yes. I have once upon a time, long ago, Human Rights Index. Similarly, people like to have these classifications and they don't realize how much arbitrary choice enters into them. There was quite a scandal because the World Bank changed some ways of indicators and on its International Competitiveness Index, and this change retrograded China. The Chinese were very unhappy.
Yes.
And so economies doing the but it was
sorry, the internet is not working very well. But go ahead.
Each weighted, and they can be weighted differently. Anyway, I have talked enough. I love to talk.
Well, no, I'm so glad
my children take I talk to.
No, it's great to have you talk, and I think the message is very clear. Certainly, comparing the past to the present in economic terms is just misleading. Okay, we just don't know what it was like and how to compare. And even today, comparing across countries is very, very tricky, simply because the countries are so different and there's just no common way to measure it. I think it's a very good point.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
But I think what is also not realized, that any price system you choose makes a completely different relationship. If you were comparing at Indian prices as it used to be compared once at American prices, the values and relationships are completely different. So it's not because you take an average that this is not arbitrary. It's an arbitrary choice of an average.
Yeah, okay.
Your podcast may decide to write another article.
Well, thank you so much. I think
anyway, we'll see.
I think we have talked enough, and
I thank you for this opportunity.
And let's say bye to the viewers.
If it comes out well.
Yeah, okay. Let me say bye to the viewers, and I'll be back with another expert fairly soon.